Hello, and welcome to episode 279 of the Board Game Barrage podcast. My name is Mark. I am the Green Tank, and I am joined, as always, by my fellow tanks, Kellen the Red Tank.
Yo, yo, yo.
And Neil in the Orange Tank.
Yo, yo, yo.
We planned that, Mark. We planned that.
Yeah, it was beautiful. It was harmonized. I couldn't believe it. It's like angels singing. On today's episode, speaking of angels and idyllic things and all that, people are saying far and wide that we are currently in a golden age of board games.
I've heard this.
Yeah.
Someone said that. Yeah.
People have been saying
People
that
say,
to someone. People say, you're not plugged into the
word
culture.
on the street.
Word on the street, word on BGG. Everyone's saying that we're in a golden age of board games. Are we in a golden age of board games? That is a question we're going to be posing later. Are we currently in it? Is it on the horizon? Is it dead? Who knows? Who can say? To borrow us. But before we figure out what metal represents the current age of board games, we're going to be talking about the games that we have been playing. Kellen is going to start us off with That's Not a Hat. I'm going to follow that up with Pulsar 2849. And finally, Neelan will be talking about the game that was named after the show, Barrage. Kellen, why don't you start us off?
So, savvy listeners of the show would go back to BGB podcast episode number 263, where I put That's Not a Hat as one of my most anticipated games of the year, based only on the title, That's Not a Hat. Super smart listeners of the show will also see that I nominated Yucatan for a slot on that list. But hopefully they have not listened to last week's episode. That's Not a Hat is a light party game with a pink box. Never expected. That's Not a Hat. In the vein of Cockroach Poker. And in fact, it's almost literally Cockroach Poker with more memory going on. So the way the game works, everyone has a little stick figure drawing in front of them of a thing, whether that's pie, whether that's a strawberry, whether that's a key or a buoy. And they will, on the first turn of the game, take a card from the middle that everyone can see. It's a key. And then you flip it over, and it'll have a right or left arrow on the card. And then you have to offer that card to that player as a gift. Say, Mark, I have a key for you. And, smart players would immediately know that it was in fact a key, right? Because they just saw the card. Mark might not, but smart players would. And you always must give your oldest gift. So you can't re-gift the gift that you just got. So Mark will have a face-up card there at the beginning of the game. He'll flip that card over. We know it was a banana. And then he will offer it to the left or right person. He may actually give it right back to me, right? He gives it right back to me. Kellen, here's a banana. And from that point forward, I've got two face-down cards, and I'm always giving the oldest card, and I can never re-look at the cards. So at the beginning of the game, everyone kind of knows all the cards, but all of a sudden, every card is face-down, and they're being given left and right and back and forth, and you are allowed to lie. So when you inevitably forget that you have a banana in front of you, you're like, what has there been? A buoy, a key, a ladder? And you confidently say, Neelan, here's a ladder. And then Neelan, if he's smart, will use the titular phrase.
That's not a ladder.
And then we'll flip it over. It wasn't great. I would give that a 6 out of 10. And I was trying to be nice tonight, Neelan. So it's a generous 6.
That is a generous 6.
And one of us will take a penalty point in the form of that card. Then we will start a new round. But what makes the game funny is all of the cards and everything that's already out on the board will stay face down. Everything doesn't reset. You just keep the knowledge continuing. And as the group gets more experience with the game, it just starts getting faster and faster. Perhaps the most hilarious thing about That's Not a Hat is how often someone because when you can't think of what it is, you just claim one of the things that you remembered recently, thing. But a lot of them become face up. So Neelan two times, not one, but 2 times in our game today was like, hey, Brandon, here's a rolling pin. And there's literally a face up rolling pin on the table. And everyone just starts giggling and goes, that's not a rolling pin. The way that you win the game is once someone gets 3 negative cards, it's over, and whoever has the least amount of cards will win the game. So a little bit different end state than Cockroach Poker. Neelan, what did you think of That's Not a Hat?
I was not 100% sold on this after the first game of it because there's a little bit of grappling with what's going on and where the game is. But my second play of it, I think, really changed it to me in something that I felt like really solid about. Like it's cute and fun. It's very easy to learn, but also it's ridiculous. It's easy to sort of look down on what is basically just a memory game. But I think the memory component of that dramatically shifts into no one's going to remember all of this, so how effectively can you bluff based on the stuff that's come before, which I think is great. I'm kind of in a minority position on Cockroach Poker, where I don't usually have that much fun with it, but I think this is a better game, personally.
Oh, disagree, Neelan. That's not a hat. It's good. And, you know, in some ways it's interesting, right? Because we've recently played Na Na, another game that injects memory into a board gamer's board game. And not that That's Not a Hat is a heavy Euro game. Actually, anecdote, a person playing with us refused to even log that they had played That's Not a Hat. They were willing to log their play of Guards of Atlantis 2 and Raw, but That's Not a Hat did not make their logging threshold.
That's funny.
For whatever it's worth or why ever that is. I've played it now 3 times with 3 different groups, really intentionally, to try to get to the bottom of this, to get to the very bottom, the
nitty-gritty,
the essence of Ravensburger's That's Not a Hat. And I think it's going to be group dependent. I'm glad I have it. It's not as good as Cockroach Poker. It does have a little bit more skill than Cockroach Poker. It's immediately apparent what you have to do in That's Not a Hat, which is remember what the is going on. In Cockroach Poker, a lot of times aimless groups will not even understand the game because they're like, it's a bug. You know, it's not immediately apparent that you want to start a chain of people all saying it's the same thing, even though it's not that thing, and targeting. Like, that's not apparent. In That's Not a Hat, it's very apparent what you have to do, but we played one game with parents who will not be named, who like lost every time it got to them, you know, and the game just like failed because it's ultimately a memory game. I am glad I have it. I will keep it in my bag for that like party game kind of night. I'm kind of interested in maybe trying it with some co-workers. Those are people that you work with adjacent to co-workers. And yeah, That's Not a Hat. I think, Mark, you should try it, certainly. Like, it's it's good. It's solid.
You really can't ever get like a long game of this, right? Because like it's too much to juggle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the second that someone accepts a lie and, you know, a ladder is a doorbell, then that lie gets perpetuated until someone, you can probably even intentionally start trying to trip people up. If things have mixed around a couple times, you could intentionally do that. So there's a little bit of bluffing, you know, in there, but often it was more about bluffing that you forgot what you had, and then even though you didn't forget what you had to try to bait the call. It's cute. It's a little procedural, though, in terms of like, move this, move that, always your oldest. It's not as flowy as just a really, 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 really simple game. But it's cute. It's a pink box. It's called That's Not a Hat. I'm sure it's like $12 or something. Totally worth trying if that sounds at all reasonable. And people on the Discord have been really liking it for what it's worth. I think it's more situational than they do.
Seems like a game that would turn people off who are anti-memory games in a way that a game like Cockroach Poker wouldn't necessarily do.
That's right. I wouldn't say it's a turn off.
I'll say one thing in its credit, which is I would have assumed that the group that we played it with today would have bounced off it, and it just worked so swimmingly well. Like, these are people that like a heavier, more strategic board game, and everyone was having fun with this. So I think it flexes both in being very accessible and light and silly, but also like just being whimsical enough to work for just about anyone.
Although that one guy didn't even log it.
Yeah, exactly.
I just think it might be the best board game name in 20 years.
Yeah, very evocative.
And you could put that on the box. You can take that to the bank.
That's right.
That's Not a Hat. That doesn't do it justice. That's Not a Hat is the name of the game I just spoke about.
That's designed by Lacerda, I assume.
I don't ever say the designers. You guys say the designers.
Yeah, you don't want anybody to get their
I have no
credit.
respect.
That's right. Oh, we don't want to actually give the designers.
Oh, well, no, but I'm serious. I don't.
Oh,
ever,
you don't really?
No,
I don't think
no.
no one ever does.
No.
Oh, really? Okay, then never mind. Fine.
Well,
fine.
no. I mean, it's not like
No,
now
let
I
him
sound
starve.
like
Let him,
a. What do you mean?
let him work and starve. No, it's fine. It's totally fine.
That's not my brand. The designer is Casper Lopp, who designed Magic Maze.
Oh.
And fun fact.
Oh, see?
He's on the up and up. We got ahead of fun facts. We're getting ahead of That's Not a Hat. He also made Gods Love Dinosaurs, so he's not good at titling board games. But but still, best titled board game, 20 years, That's Not a Hat.
Wonderful. Huh. All right, so after my recent play of Woodcraft, I had the urge to get Suchi'd up. So I decided to dust off Pulsar 2849, which I have had on my shelf of shame for I think something like 4 or 5 years, quite a while. This is by Vladimir Suchi and published by CGE. I generally have a positive relationship with sushi games, other than Last Will, which I wasn't a fan of, probably because I can't really stomach the idea, which is the central conceit of the game, which is to buy stuff high and sell low. I've pretty much enjoyed every other one of his games that I've played. Shipyard, I think, is a diamond in the rough, which I think is getting a remake soon. Underwater Cities, the aforementioned Woodcraft. I cooled a bit on Praga, which I mentioned earlier, but still like that, and was a fan of the generally divisive Blackout Hong Kong. The weird thing is, I always think going in that I won't like sushi games as much as I usually end up liking them. It's just this dumb thing that I keep doing where I just think that his designs are standard Euros, but then when I play them or play them again, I end up thinking to myself, no, actually that was really good, really fun. And so I went into Pulsar in the same way with that general low expectations going in. Pulsar 2849, if it isn't apparent already, is a space-themed Euro game. This is a dice drafting game. Before I get into the mechanics, a little bit about the aesthetics. I feel like there are strong opinions about how people feel about circular boards. I think I generally don't like them. I'm not actually sure, so maybe that means I don't care, which is probably the right answer. But I had to say that I did enjoy the aesthetics of Pulsar, including the circular board, depicting a very spacey look. And for some reason, that circular board sort of adds to that feeling. For all the black on the board.
Ooh, it's a circle. Very sci-fi. This quote brought to you by Mark Posada.
Yeah, edges are not sci-fi.
Instead of
edges
a square,
are
it's
old.
a circle.
Circles.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's right. Circles the feature. You heard it here first. But in addition to the high-tech circular board, the black depicting the darkness of space, there's also a lot of neon. What's more futuristic than neon? Tell me that, Callan. But so there's a lot of neon. The colors sort of pop. The player pieces are shiny yellow, green, red, and blue pieces that, while they aren't necessarily luxurious, I wouldn't call them that. They do have like a sleek, futuristic vibe to them a little bit. I don't know. I think it was evocative to me. It was evocative to me. Anyway, the way the game itself actually works is that to start each turn, and there's going to be 9 turns total in the game, a bunch of dice are going to be rolled based on player count and grouped by their value. Then the players are going to take turns in a snake draft order, selecting a die and then using it for a number of different purposes. The interesting choices that you have in the game start right here, and they start on 2 fronts. This is a game where higher value dice are generally better, though definitely not strictly better. And the way that this advantage to the higher value dice, like the 5s and 6s, is made up for is that if you choose a higher value die, you need to move down either this turn order track or an income track, meaning that you're more likely to be later in turn order or not get as much income if you take a higher value dice. You sort of lose ground on those 2 tracks. Conversely, if you take a lower value die, then it's more likely that you're going to be higher up on turn order and you're more likely to get more income round to round. So that's the first sort of decision you have to make on each of your turns. After you've made that decision, what you're going to do with the dice themselves open up a number of options. You can travel across the board, and if you land on these like planetary systems, you flip them up, potentially getting rewards. You can acquire what are called transmitters in the game, which is sort of the engine building system where you get instant rewards and passive income sometimes, or passive victory points. You can acquire technologies on a randomized tech tree that can also give you either one-time passive or game end abilities or scoring opportunities. And then finally, you can build these gyrodynes, which are the structures that you build in the game, the one structure that you build in the game that you build them across a number of steps, and they give you round-to-round point income as well. So a lot of different ways to score points, a little pointality in that respect. After the 9 rounds, in which the available technologies and the engine building components get stronger and stronger because they're tiered. So the engine building is tiered. You have an A deck to a C deck, and then as you move up the tech tree, which unlocks round to round, they get stronger and stronger. You'll do that for 9 rounds. After you're done with that, you are going to be scoring for one of 3 randomly selected end-of-game scoring goals. So again, you're hearing the word scoring a lot, and this is a game where scoring comes from a lot of different sources. In the end, I really liked Pulsar. In learning it and teaching it, and even in talking back about it right now, I was worried that all the choices and all the different ways to get points would feel overwhelming. But the fact that the game is only 9 rounds, meaning you get roughly 18 actions per player. Every round you're drafting 2 dice, so 9 times 2, 18. You're also going to get a number of chances to get extra action, so it's not strictly 18. But that sort of like small amount of turns relatively means that you need to focus your plans. You definitely can't just focus on one thing and expect to win doing that, but you can't do everything either. So your choices are generally focused. And, the fact that the dice are assigned values also means that your choices are limited. So you're not sitting there with like an innumerable number of choices. Sort of, again, hones your decision space, prevents it from going into analysis paralysis a lot. Otherwise, it is clearly a Euro game. There's no doubting that. As much as I like the aesthetic qualities of it, the theme definitely doesn't sort of like jump out at you. But it just felt like it was a really soundly built game, and I liked all the choices that it offered. I liked that decision you have to make regarding higher valued dice that are stronger, but you sort of hurts you in the long run. I liked the way that the different goals sort of focused you. I just thought it was really, really solid and would definitely play it again. And again, it just felt like my typical Suchi cycle where I just go in there thinking like, oh, how much better than a regular Euro game is this going to be? And I'm always pleasantly surprised. So very happy with Pulsar 2849. I know you guys played this early on in its life cycle back a couple of Gen Cons ago.
2017.
What do you think of it?
Yeah.
2017, so maybe you don't remember.
I remember what I wrote on Instagram.
Oh, what did you write there?
Pulsar 204089 is an upcoming release from CGE. Wow, this is not good. It's a beautiful, fairly simple dice drafting game where the tech tree changes each game! Exclamation mark. It plays in under 2 hours and features a lot of Eurogame decisions. So, if I recall correctly, I remember thinking that the dice drafting was quite clever and that the board play was quite boring. And I'm sure I'm exaggerating my point from way, way back then.
Yeah.
But that like it's very Euro and like you go this way to score 4 points, you go this way to score 5 points and get a portal. But that the dice drafting was pretty novel and interesting, at least at the time.
And it's a good point you make that the game isn't super long either. So there's that as well.
Yeah, my memory of it was also, I mean, despite it being a dice drafting, very evocative sci-fi game, it didn't stick in the mind as something that I needed to revisit. So I remember at the very least, even if I don't remember a lot of the specifics, being uninspired by it. But I think I mentioned this when we spoke about Woodcraft. That's kind of been a little bit of my take with, I think, the 2 other sushi games I played as well. Yeah. So they kind of just feels like everything is there mechanically, but it's not coming together in a way that excites me.
Yeah. I would say that just based on my experience, if you're a sushi fan, I think you should give it a shot because I find myself a fan of his, sort of unbeknownst to myself, and really like this. So I think if you're a fan of his other designs, you'll probably at least give this a try, if not like it.
This is the only game by Mr. Suchi that I have played. I know I've wanted to play Underwater Cities for the longest time, but other than that, what is it, like Last Will, I've maybe wanted to try. It never really happened for me with Suchi.
Praga, Blackout Hong Kong.
Yeah, Blackout Hong Kong, mildly interested in, but doesn't have as many titles for the namesake. Like Suchi is one of the big names, but there's really only there's 29 linked items on BGG, but about half of them are Underwater City promo cards.
Promos, yeah. I think he's like a once a year guy.
I think he does. That's a good output.
Good rate.
You gotta respect someone once a year.
Yeah.
Shows up, drops a bomb, gets out.
Gets out.
Yeah.
I happened to stumble on what looks to be his next game, Aldebaran Duel on BGG, and that looks cool as hell. So
all right.
Maybe there is more sushi in my life.
I think you guys are saying sushi.
I'm saying sushi. Neelan just said sushi.
I might be saying sushi. You can say.
He's hungry.
Okay.
All right. That is Pulsar 2849, Vladimir Suchi, and published by CGE.
Callan and I played a game of Barrage, our namesake, and the game that for whatever reason Callan and I hadn't been able to get a chance to play, despite kind of somewhat soft promising to each other that we would play it together, both owning a copy of it and ending up playing neither of our copies of it. So
what's a soft promise, Neelan?
a soft promise is like a promise that you can break, Alan.
Is this like when you took off your promise ring
Yeah, exactly.
that I gave you?
Uh-huh. It's when I hide the promise ring when I go out.
Oh
to a
my
bar.
God.
So Barrage is designed by Tommaso Battista and Simone Liciani, two of the so-called Italian designers, which, you know, mix and match in various combinations for some of my favorite games. So I was very excited to play Barrage. Barrage is also very popular in our Discord community. The premise of Barrage is that you are all magnates in the hydroelectric industry. You have a number of rivers running down a mountain, and water flows down these rivers. And you can, using your actions, which is primarily a worker placement game, by placing your engineers, you can build dams. You can extend those dams so that they can hold more water. You can build power plants, and you can build conduits that connect the dams to those power plants. What you are effectively trying to do in order to score points is have water behind either one of your dams or a neutral dam, run it through a conduit, which may or may not be yours, but it's better if it's yours because you don't have to pay another player for the privilege of using their conduit, to one of your power plants. If you line all that up and you take a power collection action, you generate power. Whoever generates the most power by the end of the round is going to be rewarded with a healthy dose of victory points, and there are also victory points for completing contracts, which you can acquire through other actions. The building mechanic for this is quite clever, where when you elect to take a construction, you're spending your resources, which we couldn't decide if we're actually meant to be machines or robots, but they look like robots. You put them onto this little circular wheel, and that basically acts as like a cooldown. So once that wheel gets all the way back around, that's when you free up that construction tile to be used again, and the robots that you use to build. There is an action you can take that speeds up that spinning of that little dial, as well as other actions you might expect for like dropping water, taking contracts, and so on. There is a light dose of asymmetry in the player boards that you have, which determine your unlocks as you're building dams, as you're building extensions, as you're building power plants, as you're building conduits, as well as a special power you have access to. And that's kind of as much as a mechanical summary as I feel like it is worth getting into on Barrage. It ends up in what is ultimately quite an interactive game, because as I kind of suggested, you can use other people's conduits if you're willing to pay them. The water flows down these rivers so that if it overflows your dam, it might be heading towards Kellen's dam further down the river. Kellen might build a dam upstream of my dam to stop water getting to my dam. So there's a lot of very effective blocking.
Might?
We'll definitely do that. We'll absolutely do that. That is also just on top of the fact that this is quite a tight worker placement game, in that the actions are quite limited unless you're willing to spend to get access to your secondary placement there. Very interactive, lots of effective blocking in what would otherwise be a fairly sort of dry Euro affair. Kellen, what was your take on your first game of Barrage?
I mean, my take is largely that if this game were 1 hour shorter, it would be in my top 10. And that's like total hype after one play, but wow. Very fun, very tight. Every spot, you're like, over and over again, people are taking your spots, and then over and over again, you're reevaluating how this water is flowing down these, I don't know if they're rivers, but it
What else would they be? Who could say? Who could say when water flows down?
Know.
Could be anything. Could be anything.
It could be anything.
Yeah.
Like a tributary. Do we know the differences between the different types of flowing water? I don't know. An archipelago, kind of, with the anyway.
Yeah,
it's funny because it reminded me of both Brass and Power Grid, and I'm not sure why it reminded me of Power Grid, and I was really puzzling like why it reminded me of Power Grid. There's this idea in Power Grid, which I have not played for 5 years, so asterisk, where you have your turns and then you have to power as much as you can. And there's this element in Barrage where like each turn you're trying to get power points and like process water, but it resets between every round. And so there's like this element of like, can I do enough this time? And then having to redo that the next time. And then combined with a board where you're sort of making these connections and trying to sort of, I don't know, in my mind, they're related. But then the shared infrastructure of Brass is an obvious comparison. I would say that I get concerned with the asymmetry. I know in our first game, we just were handed some powers as opposed to like doing a draft of your primary power and doing a draft of your secondary power. And I don't like that. But I loved Barrage, and I would love to play it again. It's on Board Game Arena, so I could up your guys' water rivers right after we get done with this.
I will agree that I question whether this needs the asymmetry. I feel like with enough of like a sort of slightly varied starting state and the fact that you're getting in each other's faces very quickly, I don't know it also needs asymmetry layered on top of that. Woe be me to like question the balance of this game, but like that's where you start to like worry a little bit, right? So I would almost prefer just to remove that element from the equation. It does the Marco Polo thing where everyone has what is quite a powerful special power, but then you also couple that with a player board that's slightly different in terms of the resources that it incentivizes and the buildings it incentivizes, and that combo gets me a little bit worried. But regardless, I thought that this was really, really solid and at the very least very interesting. I am not sold on whether it's a game for me yet, because I had the same aversion to it that I often have with my first plays of Splotter games, which is to say that the ways that parts connect are so intricate that if you don't come out of the gate strong, it can be quite hard to recover. It's not a game where you are necessarily going to make a huge move and get a ton of victory points late unless you've been playing fairly solidly up until that point. And I think that's actually one of the more interesting things about the design. You know, we've spoken about this idea that what you're primarily doing is generating power, but it's not like you can come on in round 5 and generate 30 power and get 30 victory points. It's not as closely correlated than that. If you get more power than another player, you're getting more points than them, but it's a matter of increments. Like this is made up by getting contracts, which can also reward you victory points. But again, a lot has to line up in order to generate what would be a big turn. And what happened in our game is the thing that always happens in these types of games, and that Kellen got me. Kellen got me early, and he got me good for the rest of the game, and we were just strangling each other.
Okay, let's Nealon. We had a shared infrastructure. He had a dam. Uh-huh. I had a conduit. Okay, the power was flowing. Nealon was getting his PP. I was getting my point and my dollar. And then who f***ed it up? Oh, I think I actually fucked it up first.
You did. You put the dam above my dam.
That was the first attack. But then you built a dam above my dam. I diversified. Okay, I was in multiple rivers, and then you, rather than
wait, are we sure the rivers?
We're not sure. Sorry. In the bodies of moving water.
Yeah.
Nealon then built another dam above my dam, and we let Dean run away with it. That's what you let happen. I will say that I actually had hoped there was more interactivity on the board. I will say very blocky, and there's a lot of you can do. But in terms of like real shared infrastructure, it's just those conduits. And like, you know, in best case scenario, I would love to hear like the most an opponent has ever used someone's conduit in a game of Barrage. What is it, like 7 or 8 times? Would be like insane to me.
The one other component that is a little bit more abstracted than that is sometimes using a conduit pumps water upriver. So you can kind of sometimes like siphon off of someone's power, but not in a direct way as using someone's conduit. But that didn't happen that much in our game for what it's worth. So I will say it's like half a click abstracted away, certainly from Brass in terms of, oh yeah, you must be trying to use other people's stuff in order to do well.
Yep. But Mark, you like Barrage.
Yeah, I actually had a little bit of a roller coaster history with it. So when I first played it a couple times years ago when it first was released, I really, really enjoyed it. I liked it a lot. And then had a hard time getting it to the table. You alluded to the fact that your game was quite long, Kellen?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was 4 players, probably 4 hours with the teach. It's probably right.
Geez, wow. Okay. Oh, with
right?
the teach.
Because it's like 6.
I think that's about right. Yeah. Probably 4 hours including teach, I think is right.
Yeah.
So after that initial burst of playing it and really liking it, I had a hard time getting it to the table. My own fault, too, because I hadn't played it for a while and then just thought that teaching again would be cumbersome and long. So I didn't play it for a little while. I had it slipped down my top 50 list. But then recently got a chance to play it again in person. And then you mentioned the BGA implementation. Have had a chance to play that once now. And it's really reinvigorated my love for it. So yeah, I have been enjoying it again quite a bit. And I've heard that there are now at least a couple of maps. I don't know. I think I've probably played with the expansion once. I can't remember what circumstances were. But I think in addition to the Lee Water expansion, there are now maps that maybe force different strategies and perhaps make things more or less aggressive as well. I'm not really sure. But I've heard that the maps make quite a bit of difference. So
that's interesting. If my experience with the way that a simple map change revitalized my play of like Hunter Teutonica, for example, I can see that being quite interesting. But again, I think unfortunately my reaction was, I will probably not be keeping my own personal copy of Barrage because I don't know that I can ever get this played because of how long and heavy it is. But I would not turn down another game of it. I enjoyed it at least enough to be intrigued to play it, want to play it again.
Dice Tower Judgment into my collection.
I think you're contractually obligated to keep it, Nealon, based on the title.
That's true, actually. At the very least, just to have on my shelf.
We can do a 3-player game.
VGA? Yeah, let's do it. Yeah. VGA.
Barrage Boys playing Barrage.
Sounds good to me.
We could put that on Patreon. Make a killing.
That's right.
Probably not. Async game, played over 30 days. The live stream.
Announce when we're going to make our turns.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that is Barrage by Cranio Creations.
Before we discuss whether or not we're in the Golden Age or the Golden Age has passed us by, we're going to announce the winner of the last draft. Before we do that, actually, let's announce among the three of us who actually won the draft. I'm saddened to report that we had another rout by Nealon.
Yeah.
I am thrilled about this. I don't know that I expected this based on where we landed with our lists, but very happy. I'm pleased to say quite comfortably won this one, so very happy about that.
Yeah, I got crushed again. My spirit is completely broken now. I don't know what I'm doing anymore.
The draft is over.
No more?
Yeah, done.
We're going to pick a winner?
Stop at 900.
All right, so we're going to take all the emails, the people who voted for the draft. We're going to put them in one of those bingo ball randomizer machines. We're going to swing them around. I'm going to put some helium in the ones who voted for me to sort of have them rise to the top. Inject a little bit of helium. You know what that means, Kellen? A little bit of helium in the balls.
Are you about to... What? It's a family show.
Never mind. All right, mixing them up. Pull in one of the balls.
Pull in one of the balls.
It's a helium-filled ball. Maybe, I don't know. But
this is really uncomfortable.
But if your email starts with the letter G and ends with @gmail.com, then we might have picked you. You're going to be notified by us through email. I'll also let you all know that the email starts with a G and there's a period in there. So I just don't, because there's a lot of Georges and Gregory's probably listening. It starts with a G, there's a period in the name, and then @gmail.com. You're going to be getting email from us soon with instructions to get your $50 gift certificate to the board game retailer of your choice. So thank you for voting. Thanks everybody for voting, and vote for me next time so I can put more helium in your balls. On to the feature topic. Are we in a golden age of board gaming? And I guess the obvious way to start would be to define what we would consider a golden age of board gaming. What comes to mind for you guys when we use the term golden age of board gaming? What qualifies as a golden age of board gaming, you think?
Well, some of my research on this was derailed when I discovered that Wikipedia claims that the golden age of board gaming happened between the years 1880 and 1920. So,
oh my God! Episode over, and thank you to Heart Society for your fantastic song.
We peaked at Rook. Rook, I think, was right around that time. Is that ushered in by like Monopoly or something?
I think it's mass scale manufacture, right?
I see.
So it's when board games go to the masses very quickly. But no, we're talking about more of a nebulous target, right? Which is to say that this idea, and I think most people would at least somewhat agree that this is at least a little bit kicked off by Catan, right? Which is to say that games become more interesting, very dramatically different from the prior games that had existed at the time, more mass market, for lack of a better word, going to a wider audience in a way that were not just the same 10 games that you had in your parents' closet.
So yeah, I mean, I guess we can think of Golden Age in like one of a number of different possible ways. Like, is it a quality threshold? Is it a number of games in the market threshold? Is it a popularity threshold? Is it an innovation threshold? What would signify, or what would qualify, or what needs to be met in order to qualify for a golden age?
So I would say that the most often that I hear this phrase used is both in the board game world and in the television world, where people say things like, I'm so happy that I live in the golden age of X because there's so many good things, right? So TV, you got your Breaking Bads, your Mad Men's, your Wires, blah, 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 your Succession, if you're up on the up and up. And in the board game world, right, there's the Eurogame explosion. I think Neelan is correct to identify that as Catan, which is what, 95, 96-ish? And so I guess the thrust or the interesting question to me would be for us to determine if we feel like we're living right now in the golden age of board gaming.
Yeah, the one thing that sort of concerns me about using the term golden age is that, as Neelan has sort of mentioned, and to piggyback off what you were saying, Kellen, when I think of golden age, the term golden age, the aspect of culture that jumps out to me is television, yes, but also comics. Because growing up reading comics, like there was always the golden age, silver age, bronze age, and then
for sure.
modern. And so golden age to me has always been associated with the golden age of comics, which is always like the first appearance of Superman. It's very fixed in terms of like old. So Neelan's saying, for whatever it's worth, Wikipedia is saying that they consider golden age to be like the early. So does there have to be like an origination component to it? Because if that's the case, then I think it's hard to argue that we are, right? Because we would have to say, if not agree with Wikipedia's, I think in that case we would have to say, what would we say, like 70s with like Cosmic and Saxon and that kind of stuff? Or would we say Knizia and like the Catan sort of thing? So I wonder how much weight we put into the historical aspect of it. You know,
I think one of the things that's interesting is that, and I think, this is the heart of what the topic is, right? I don't think it's enough to say that, hey, the golden age began in the 70s or in the 90s and we're still in it, right? Like, right. To me, that doesn't qualify as a golden age. There has to be some semblance of the idea that it's finite, because to me, like, again, with Kellen, the time I felt this being thrown about the most was, again, the TV example. I actually don't know if this is true, but I think there was a TV critic I was reading a lot at the time, who's Alan Sepinwall, who I think was writing for Rolling Stone, and he kind of identified it as a very specific period, which is like Sopranos, Mad Men, and Lost, and it kind of like that era. And it very much was understood that we're not really in that golden age anymore. It was like a narrow window of time that kind of ended, I wouldn't say around Breaking Bad is my understanding of it. So either we sort of say that, like, yeah, there was this great period that's kicked off in like the 70s, 80s, 90s, and it's largely past, or we're in this just nebulous, games are always going to be good forever from now on.
But I think you, Neelan, I will quote you from previous episodes of the 200 million that I've listened to you speak, I've said board games are, on the whole, always getting better than they were previously. So semantics aside of the golden age or whatever, what have you, like, it's the best time to be a board gamer than it ever has been before.
I stand by that. Like, it is funny because I have, like, as an exercise, posed this to various personalities of people in the industry and designers. And I feel like I'm in a fairly minority position on believing that games are strictly getting better. But I hold by that. I think that a lot of things, in a lot of industries, it is an iterative one. I absolutely believe this about video games, in that video games largely build off of the successes that have come before them, and as a rule tend to, if you take the average quality of games tends to move upwards, in my opinion, which does kind of make it hard, right? Because I don't think that I could say definitively, like, oh yeah, 5 years ago, I've seen them slowly start to decline. Like, that's just not true from my experience. I largely continue to be excited by games that are coming out year over year.
And I think that that's, again, the hardest thing would be that it would be impossible to, in a moment, objectively, to any degree, determine whether we are in or not in a golden age of board gaming. But that's why we get the juicy topics, so that we can argue about it and determine what is subjectively true. And what I will say is that I subjectively believe that the 1995 to 2010 era was closer to a golden age of board gaming than the 2010 to now and the future era. So 1995, Settlers of Catan, Carcassonne, I think, in the early 2000s, Puerto Rico, Ticket to Ride, Agricola, Pandemic. When did Seven Wonders come out? Probably right around my arbitrary cutoff in 2010. And where we are now, I would argue, or want to argue, is a place where we are drowned by too many board games. Ergo, we are no longer in a golden age of board games.
Do you think, Kellen, that the average
I do
quality
think.
of games...
Oh, sorry, I didn't finish
Hard
your
to believe.
question.
No, that should be answered as well, because I know there's been some conjecture about that. No, do you believe, as Neelan has said, and that I think I also agree with, that the average quality of games has gone up, the tide has risen in general?
No. I think that the usability and the shorthand and, perhaps are, as Neelan so generously argued last week, that Yucatan was not the bad rule book and bad iconography, that was not the game Yucatan, right? That was ancillary to the game that was Yucatan. I would say all of those ancillary things are objectively getting better. More money being poured into artwork, more money being poured into rule books, more shared iconography and brain power, making it easier for us to absorb and play the games. But
it is interesting, if I may just interrupt really quickly, because I actually do think that in that context, that does play into more of my holistic view on the upward trajectory of games, which is taking into account art, production, all of that stuff. But I do think this does, for what it's worth, also apply even if you were to strictly consider design. Like that, and again, that's my hot take.
And I think I agree with you. I think the biggest argument against things being a golden age, and for me, I don't know, it's so hard for me, again, to consider anything modern to be a golden age. But if we're going to allow for the modern age to be a golden age, I think the biggest argument against it is the sheer volume of dross, the sheer volume of not good games that are out there.
And in fact, Mark, let's inject some objectivity into this discussion. And I will quote BGG users who have done the math, not on us. So thank you to this thread started by user Ian Rapson, and we can put this in the show notes. It appears that if you include expansions, the amount of games published in 2010 compared to 2019 has doubled. As in, there are over 3,000, less than 4,000 in 2010. 2019 is over 7,000 published games. And again, blah, 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 asterisk, asterisk. These are games that have been classified on BGG or have been put into the system. But what I would argue is that even if the golden age of board gaming isn't dead, that you, the listener, you, Mark and Neelan, are unable to participate in it because you're drowned in a sea of mediocrity.
I think there's some truth to that. I think that one of the downsides, and it's interesting because I think one of the things that's inarguable for me is that we're in the phase of board gamedom now, which is not unlike the early 2000s in video games for indie culture, where your accessibility as a design process, this is not just the realm of Hasbro anymore. You can, if you are an independent person or creative, get your game to market in a way that was never possible before. I think that's incredibly laudable, but I think the downside of that is exactly what you're saying, Kellen, is that the role that curatorship plays in trying to even find what's good out there is incredibly hard.
But there are more curators. I mean, you're listening to curators right now.
What more would you need than just us?
Yeah, that's right. But
Mark,
good. Yeah,
I will let you talk, but I just want to respond. If we wanted one preeminent critic to play all the games, right? We're talking, I did the math, okay? More objectivity. 17.8 games that Tom Vassell would have to play per day.
I mean, he's up to 20, I'm sure.
Per day.
20s.
Yeah, but he doesn't work on the Sabbath. So we're already 1/7 out of this, Mark.
Good point.
How could the curators curate?
Yeah, I mean, that's true, but I just think that, to use the analogy of a shotgun, if you have more bullets out there, if you have more scatter out there,
Yeah, finish the analogy.
you're going to have more bullseyes. Like, I understand the sheer number, and I agree that there's a lot more garbage out there. And I agree that with Nealon's point that lowering the bar for people to get into the hobby and to become designers does mean a lot of like stuff that is not up to snuff. But it also means that you get a lot of voices that you would not have gotten in the past. You get a lot of innovation or outside the box thinking that you wouldn't have gotten in a publisher mandated system,
Yeah, the way that I always sort of unfortunately have to like qualify even my position on this is that assuming that you are able to find the games that you're inclined to like, and curate designers or creators that are attuned to you, you have more access to stuff that is closer to your wheelhouse than ever before. But again, that does impose a lot of legwork on the individual. I would say that for the average person that walks into like a Target or a board game store, I don't think they're having a better time with board games now than versus, let's say, 20 years ago. So it is so specific to your position and how much you're willing to engage with what's out there.
I disagree.
Yeah. Oh, you can do it, Mark.
I think I disagree with that. I think for the average person walking into a Target, picking up a random hobby board game, I think they're getting a much better experience. Whereas they were maybe in the past, like 20 years ago, whatever, their choices were Monopolies or Life or Sorries or something like that. Now they can bump into like a Wingspan. They can fall into like a Codenames, I think once it gets to like the big box mass market where, the most eyes are going to be on them, I think at that point you get enough business curation, like these companies are going to be curating to like sell as many games as possible. So I think the games that show up in the eyes of like non-hobby board gamers are going to be some of the cream of the crop.
I think that's true, but like I still feel like, and maybe I'm wrong about this, that the large majority of what I see on Target shelves is still like mass market. I mean, it's not just Monopoly, it's not just the old classics, but it's the sort of low-hanging fruit style, like adult party game fare.
Sure, but what is the best game you could have walked out of Target with?
You're absolutely right. I do think the highs are high. And you're probably, which is actually a position I would support, which is to say that I think if you were to pick a box at random in a Target, you'd probably still end up with a higher average chance of getting a good game than previously. I think that's probably true.
And to your point, yes, now the Target gaming shelves are bigger. That does allow for a lot more of the stuff that is like middling that we talked about with just the exponential growth of games being published. So yeah, you are also going to get a lot of stuff that is not so great at Target, but again, you're going to open eyes to people to really good stuff as well.
What I would be intrigued to ask, like, so Kellen's even specifically, like, where, and maybe you said this already, so I apologize. Where would you see as like the game that was like the tail end, if it's worth, like the last great game of the golden age?
Well, I think that it's probably also maybe related to Kickstarter. And
that's interesting.
That is a thing that we have not discussed yet in this episode. And I would say that the start of Kickstarter, when was the original Scythe Kickstarter?
So funnily enough, this is something I wanted to make sure I had for my notes. So 2015 is when Scythe goes onto Kickstarter.
So
what about Alien Frontiers? Like the very first big
one, right?
Yeah.
It's all subjective, man. And I want to super stress that, because I want to say it's sometime around then. And I think that, I want to be really clear, right? Because so Splendor has come out, Sushi Go, King of Tokyo, Love Letter, these games have come out. What I was trying to do in my research for this episode was get out from the Kellen is a grumpy old man and the games today are not as good as the games 10 years ago. And I don't have objective data points, but I would like to inject two other things in this conversation. One, Kickstarter has ruined hobby board gaming. And two, that board games now in 2022 are being designed to be appreciated and enjoyed in a magnitude of 1 to 3 plays, and board games designed in 1995 were being designed to be played 10 plus times. And I do not have a data point that supports that beyond anecdotal accounts from designers talking about how they have to make a board game have a better first impression or that it has no chance within the marketplace. But when you combine more and more and more games in the marketplace, a game does have to catch sooner. And so those are my proof points that are totally objective that I would love reaction to.
Scythe, the last great game of the Golden Age, I guess.
That's put that on the dust cover sleeve for the anniversary edition.
I think there is no arguing that games are designed nowadays to have that first strong impression. And probably, I think for the most part, they are not designed with the sort of long-term high number of plays in mind that maybe we had in earlier games. That said, I think that the best games out now hold up and get better on multiple plays. I mean, again, this is all anecdotal, but the first game that pops to mind is Barrage, which I think has revealed depths as I played it more and more. I think a lot of games that are, again, well built have that quality to them nowadays. And I just don't know. It's hard for me to figure out what we want, because we want games that are going to be good on first play, right? I think that is a quality, that is a beneficial thing. Now, we don't want it at the cost of a game that is not fundamentally sound. It can't hold up to multiple plays, but I think that is a positive evolution as a whole. And if you marry that to advances in game design and you have a game that starts out strong but also can hold up, I think that is a net positive. I mean, again, I agree that, the vast majority of games, and there are more games out there, so the vast majority is even bigger numerically, are either shallow or not well designed or stuff like that. But again, I think the top end is better and better. I just think that, to harken back to Neal's point, like the average has gone up.
I think that, and I'm surprised that either of you haven't made the argument, so I'll make it for you. The one thing that I also did want to discuss was BGG's rankings, yes, as perhaps another objective, quote unquote, way to say that the quality of games have gone up.
So I found this data as well, and what was interesting to me is that it suggests that the rating goes up, but the Bayesian average doesn't, which kind of, makes sense. It feels to me like it's just the thing that you would expect from every internet ranking system ever, where all the numbers just constantly are on the up and up and up.
Yeah, I would not make that argument in defending the idea that we are currently in a strong or golden age, because, I just feel like the numbers are being inflated. The last game that was a Kickstarter success that wasn't rated at 8.5 or higher only got a low rating because they didn't fulfill on time, or the backers are upset. I think quality has very little correlation to Kickstarter games or the ratings games get. That's a tough one.
Yeah, perhaps I'm anticipating some of the feedback that we are sure to get on the episode, but BGG and the publishers are incentivized for the rankings to change because it drives traffic to the rankings and it gives the publishers things to talk about. It is pretty wild to me. I just started going through the list and thinking about my arbitrary 2015 cutoff. Pandemic Legacy Season 1 makes it, but in the top 10, it's 2018, 2017, 2021, 2017, 2016, 2020. War of the Ring, besides Pandemic Legacy Season 1, is the only one that comes before 2015. Dune Imperium, Star Wars Rebellion, Spirit Island. So every game is new. BGG declares a new golden age of board gaming. Here it is.
I've said this before, but I'm actually not that against that, honestly, because I think that if you don't have splash, if you don't have a genuinely good game have the ability to move up the rankings, I think you stifle excitement, you stifle innovation. I think if we said, okay, Tigris and Euphrates, Modern Art, all this stuff, which are justifiably Agricola, are justifiably fantastic games, but if we said okay, you have to meet this quality or you can never move above it under no conditions, there's nothing. We will not allow for any hype. We will not allow for any blingingness, any shallow benefit or anything like that. Then you just have these gray games at the top, which are, yes, fundamentally fantastic. There's no excitement. You don't get people excited in the hobby. You don't get people like if you're trying to convince a friend of yours to potentially get into board gaming and like, oh, what's the best game of all time? And you pull out Castles of Burgundy, which is a solid game, but it's like gray and beige and like little thin chits. And I'm like, having that occasional genuine quality game jump up. I don't want garbage up there, but a genuine good game, I think giving the benefit to newer games is a good thing. And I know that's a sort of like controversial, I think, take, but I just think that spurs dynamism in the hobby.
Sales.
But because like
sales too. Yes, I agree.
Because I also think the opposite of that is just like perpetuating the dogma of, oh, these games are the best and there will be nothing ever better than them, right? Because, you know, like to jump back to like our TV analogy, like I love The Wire, but try to convince anyone in 2023 to start watching The Wire is a very, very hard ask. And it's a very much of its place and time at its position where the TV industry was. It felt so almost like counterculture to like what the state of prestige TV was at that time. And that's kind of somewhat how I feel about board games. Like if you were to tell me that Tigris and Euphrates, or to use Mark's example, Castle of Burgundy, will ever, forever and always be one of the greatest games ever made, that would make me very sad. Like, I don't want to live in the board game industry world where that's the case. I want the dynamism. I want the perpetual reevaluation of what we consider quality to be.
I think that it only suits like hyper hobbyists and even like casual to people even listening to this, I don't think are served by that, to be honest with you.
I think you're probably right. I do think you're probably right. I do think that I'm definitely perpetuating a goal that better serves the sale of new game to other people. And that sucks to sort of, you know, say that I'm a part of like the capitalist wheel of the board game industry. Like that's not ideal. But I'd also be lying if I didn't say that is the part of the continual uphill struggle of board games getting better and being excited about how a board game will improve upon the board games I know is the part that is interesting and exciting to me.
Yeah, I think I disagree with the idea that it doesn't serve. I mean, it doesn't serve people who are not hobbyists because they don't care, so they don't need to be served. But I think for like listeners and people like that level of the hobby, I think they enjoy board games. So if you're going to tell them, well, all you need is a collection of 5 games from 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and you're fine, then you wouldn't get games like Ark Nova, which, yeah, it's not my type of game, but it is a solid game. It's beautiful. There's something to be gained from that. We don't want, and it's been like our stated goal, I think, that we're trying to like curate. We're trying to give people recommendations on games that they should spend their money on, knowing that we don't want people to spend their money on garbage. But if you told me that we were encouraging hobbyists to get 3 games a year or 4 games a year, I think that's what they would want to get. I don't think that's necessary. I mean, obviously, circumstance by circumstance is much different, but if you love board games, you want to try different board games. You shouldn't try like a new one every week or whatever like we're doing, which is crazy, but your life is going to be benefited by getting 4 games a year or whatever, or getting the best games that are released per year.
Yeah, I think that largely my take, and is something that we've touched upon in years past, would be that the best way to be a hobbyist board gamer would be to play 10 games every year that were the best ranked games from 10 years ago, and that you would be better served than trying to help, even with the help of, you know, the best in the business, Shut Up and Sit Down, So Very Wrong About Games, and Board Game Barrage, to curate the best 10 from 2022, you'd be better off just playing the best ranked games there, and that you are drowning in a sensory overload, a la Brave New World, where you just have too many choices.
Yeah, I don't think I would make that cut off 10 years, but if you said 3 years, if you said play top 10 games as chosen by the critics you trust from 3 years ago, I would 100% agree. And I totally think that's the way to do it.
So to answer the question, Mark, that you started this with, are we in a golden age of board games? It doesn't matter because you won't get to experience them anyway.
That's right. You're never...
And scene.
All right. With that, we are going to wrap up the show, but let us know what you think about that. Do you think we are in a golden age? If not, why not? Or when do you think the golden age was? I would love to hear your opinions on that, and you can give them to us in a variety of different ways. Perhaps the quickest and easiest would be to go to our Discord at boardgamebarrage.com/Discord and share your thoughts in the podcast channel where we have listeners talk about that week's current episode. You can also email us at boardgamebarrage@gmail.com. You can discuss it on our guild at boardgamebarrage.com/guild. You can hit us up on all forms of social media. You know what those are. Big thank you, as always, to Heart Society for our intro and outro song, What's on Your Mind, Kid? And until next week, goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
I'm high. I'm ready. I want you to save me from myself.
3, 2, 1. I think there was a fast clap on my end. I apologize for that. Okay.
There's a pill for that.
I feel like you've made a lot of erection jokes recently.
Oh, really? You think
what?
I'm preoccupied with that?
I mean, I'm just saying you're making a lot of jokes. If you take that as being preoccupied, that's on you. Hello, and welcome to episode 279 of the Board Game Barrage podcast.